Thank you so much for joining us on Rwanda TV on this special edition of Special Guest. And we are joined by the President of the Africa Wildlife Foundation, Kaddu Sebunya. Thank you so much for having time for Rwanda TV.
Let's have you. Thank you very much.
So just give me a brief overview about what the Africa Wildlife Foundation is all about.
Africa Wildlife Foundation is our largest conservation organization focused on Africa. We are a pan-African institution. We are headquartered in Nairobi, and we have a longer history in Africa. We were founded in 1961 when Africa was gaining independence. So
a longer history of many years, or a longer history of many developments?
A long history of a lot of effort in Africa and success stories, but of course a lot of lessons also we've learned from some of the things we've been doing and improving.
When you say success stories, could you give me a few of those that you think you have tremendously achieved and we can get to know about them?
Yep, I'll start from Rwanda. We've been working in Rwanda for more than 30, 40 years around the Virunga Mountains, the Volcano National Park. We have been so much involved with partnership with a program called IGCP. We've been around and conservation, the expansion of the park, the management of the park, training of guides, monitoring aspects of that. We've been involved here. But I think the most successful thing we've done in Rwanda is raising the bar in terms of how communities perceive but also gain
from that.
From the tourism industry.
Rwanda has tremendously, on a large scale, achieved that. We see, every year, we just had the Kwitizina the other day, it's becoming a business and investment, but Rwanda is just a drop in the ocean.
Yes.
When we talk about the Africa Wildlife Foundation, we mean the African continent. So what are some of the things that these other countries are not getting right that actually Rwanda got right, and where do you come in to see that Uganda and other countries also get it right? Yeah,
Rwanda is very important to Africa Wildlife Foundation, but it's the scale. I mean, we spend over $30 million annually across our programs on the continent. But Rwanda is an interesting case in terms of conservation efforts, in terms of tourism efforts, in terms of the policies around natural resource governance. We've seen in a lot of countries the policies are right, but the implementation gets short, but also the investment in terms of budget allocations for conservation becomes shorter than a lot of other sectors.
The investment is supposed to come from the governments?
Not necessarily, but the government has a responsibility to wildlife and wild places, a responsibility to the nations of those countries. Where the resources come from might come from different players,
like you,
but the primary responsibility
should be government.
Should be government.
So the neighboring countries to Rwanda are not doing this right. They are not allocating enough money to this.
They are not.
How important is conservation, especially in the development of the countries?
Conservation is, and that's why we are here at this investment forum. Conservation manages the ecological infrastructure necessary for the country's development. Conservation is a big part of our development story, and Africa's ecology is the infrastructure for Africa's development, is part of that. And that's why conservation is very, very important.
You talked about yesterday, balancing conservation and investment. And I just want you to give me the context in which you would put it and break it down for us. How do we balance it?
Balancing it is really where we think we are right now. Africa, as we heard for the last two days, is booming economically. It's the most invested in continent globally. The economic growth is between 3 and 5 average across the countries. What we haven't seen is the attention countries or Africans are paying to the wildlife and wild places, or what we call the ecological infrastructure that is going to sustain the growth we see on the continent. balancing that is very, very, very important. What we've seen, the discussion has been as if we have choices to choose between conservation and development, which is completely a wrong concept. We need to find, we can have both aspects, but we just need to balance both of them and have that discussion. We think that Africa is at a crossroad right now. As we attract a lot of investment, the discussion around the management of our resources, the areas we need to conserve for our development need to be identified, the investment we need to do for that, not only for just conserving wildlife, but sustainability of the investments. I was giving an example yesterday of energy. We've seen huge investments. They were talking about billions of dollars on the energy sector, and a big part of that is hydro. But nobody, yesterday we had a banker saying water is free. Water is never free. It comes from somewhere. And our water towers of Africa need to be conserved for us to sustain the investments we are making in hydro generation, power generation. The idea that water will be there, so we don't have to take care of that. Let's take care of the infrastructure, other infrastructures necessary for us to increase our energy sources is not going to take, is a very, very short term. We need to, we've had the panel on agriculture discussing agriculture, and we've had they're talking about $1 trillion investments in agriculture. And as agriculture is going to be the engine for Africa's development. But agriculture is rain-fed. Where is the water for agriculture going to come from when we are not going to conserve our forests?
So I think it's very important to first look at conservation before we get into these other sectors.
No, we don't have to look at conservation before. They have to be
balance them.
The reason I'm here as a conservation organization, the Investment Forum, is wildlife, wild places, conservation has to be in the boardroom when we are discussing the next project for Rwanda. I am here to represent the gorillas for that discussion. I'm here to represent water sources in that discussion. I am here to represent some of the communities.
Don't you think,
Marshals,
as we want to the governments to know that this is very important, it actually goes back to the common man, because these gorillas live with people wherever they are.
Yes.
So don't you think it's very important to first make our people understand before you even get to the policy makers, which Rwanda in this case is doing really well?
No, we don't have to choose one or the other. I think people understand. Africans, we've been living with this wildlife for centuries. We understand the idea of our relationship as Africans with the wildlife. What has happened is that the new development aspects that are being introduced in our livelihoods are disrupting our relationship with wildlife and wild places. And the discussion and negotiation around that play is so important. But otherwise, the awareness of our communities, they're very, very much aware. What we need to see is the benefits we've seen in urban centers reach the communities around our assets, ecological assets, important ecological assets. And they shouldn't rely so much on the resources and the lack of the management of those resources that are going to be detrimental for our wildlife.
Some time back in one of the interviews, actually 2 interviews, you said that wildlife is going extinct. And I just want to find out, is this still the same case?
Unfortunately, it is. And actually recently, 2 weeks ago, we had a report about the population of elephants. It's decreasing. Africa is losing about 30,000 elephants or more annually. And if statistically that continues, we have less than 20 years to put a block to that process. We've lost half of our lions. A lot of countries, including Rwanda, we no longer have rhinos in this country. It's a crisis, we are under crisis, and that's why we are supporting the governments who decided that the ban of ivory trade. And illegal wildlife trade. Poaching is a big detriment for our wildlife. And unfortunately, poaching doesn't benefit any government or majority of people.
It benefits a small group of...
It's a small group of Africans, but mostly it's an international trade. As Africans, we really need to look at this poaching business, which is an illegal activity, and stop it, because...
How do we stop it? That's the question.
There are a number of things we are doing as African Wildlife Foundation to address that. And we are looking at it in 3 ways. We must stop the killing, and the killing has to stop, from your previous question, by increasing the benefits communities around these national parks gain from conservation. We must improve the investments we are doing in our protected areas to improve management, the monitoring of our resources. We need to increase the infrastructure in our parks. We need also to start looking at the economies around the areas around the national parks. We are a conservation organization, but we invest in schools. We do agricultural projects. We do businesses, enterprise, to increase the economy and lessen the reliance of populations on wildlife and wild places. Those kind of models help to stop the killing. The other idea is to stop the trafficking. Strategy is to stop the trafficking. And we are doing a number of projects. Here in Rwanda, we are working with RDB to look at the law, wildlife law in this country. We've done it in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Ethiopia. We are supporting government and other governments. We are supporting governments to revise and improve wildlife laws so that the penalties and the costs of poaching or misuse of wildlife also are looked as any other crime. We are also looking at the dogs at the airports. We have a canine program. The dogs you see, especially at the airport in Nairobi, which has been very successful program, is helping to stop the trafficking. We're putting more in Uganda now. The Uganda program started a couple of months ago. We have dogs at the airport in Dar es Salaam and Mombasa port. We are going to Mozambique, Ethiopia. All those things, we need to stop the trafficking. We also have trainings of and raising awareness among the judges and prosecution, because many cases, even when you catch the bad guys, prosecuting them is very, very hard.
Especially on the African continent.
Collecting evidence is very, very, very difficult, and proving the case. So we are looking at that. But also, you cannot stop the killing, stop the trafficking without doing anything on the demand side. So we are raising awareness in Asia, and especially North America, which is the biggest market for our wildlife, to stop the demand of these products. It's amazing how that a lot of Chinese don't understand that the rhino horn they're buying has the same properties as your nail, and that it has no medicinal properties at all. So they're being conned.
So we have to raise this awareness.
We have to raise that, but also the response in raising our awareness, that has to be an African voice.
So we need the cooperation of all the players in the system.
We need the cooperation of our players, especially the media.
The private sector and the media.
The media, when it comes to awareness,
which we are doing just right now.
Which we are doing right now, but we need to increase this idea that the voice which is going to help us stop the wildlife trade or improve our conservation has to be an African voice, and we are the leader in that. We think that I'm an African. I grew up in Africa, but growing up, I've never seen on TV. I had never seen on TV an African or National Geographic or Discovery Channel.
But things have changed, and that's why people keep saying we're on the right track, and we are. Africa is rising, and I hope some of these things now that we can talk about them on TV and raise this awareness.
We want to hear our leaders to explain to us why wildlife and wildlife are important to Africans.
And journalists.
We need journalists to do that. We need our CEOs. We need our central bank governors. We need our ministers. It's not about conservationists like me. We need our celebrities, musicians, sports fraternity to come and tell Africans. Otherwise, in many countries I travel, wildlife is for foreigners. Tourism is for foreigners. Africans think that we are conserving wildlife for international people.
Yeah, this is definitely going to have to change. Mr. Kaddu, it was a pleasure to have you on Rwanda TV.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for being part of this particular interview. Keep watching our TV.